The dust in dry water rose like prayer smoke every time a wagon rattled through the main street, and Tamsin Bell learned a long time ago to read those pale plumes the way some folks read faces. The thin white skein meant a freight team headed north and in a hurry. The dense rolling brown meant cattle pushing through the heat and kicking moo into the sky. Most days, Tamsin only watched and listened and kept her hands busy with harness soap, curry combs, and the rhythm of hay forks. Watching was safer than speaking. Listening was safer than being heard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. This morning the dust told a small story. 2 riders, one saddle sore, one coiled. The sound reached the livery before their silhouettes did. Spur jingle that tried too hard to scare, followed by a limp scraping of leather that confessed its own exhaustion. Tamsin had the south stall swept and the oat bin near full, and the mare she was calming, Old Bay with a scar like a question mark near the withers, sank into her touch as if the woman's fingers were a creek after weeks of drought. She could feel the town the way a horse does, through hooves and breath. Dry water sat between 3 territories' grudges like a coin under 3 greedy thumbs. The map called it a crossing, but folks kept to the dust lanes because a crossing means you might change your mind. Most didn't. They came through with their choices already strapped to them. Tamsin. Sheriff Abel Crane appeared in the livery doorway with sun on his hat brim. He always took the soft step when he came to her. He claimed it was respect for horses, but the woman knew better. Abel was a decent man, which in dry water meant he wore his decency like a coat, too heavy for summer. He tipped his head toward the street. "You hear?" "I hear 2 who think they're 10, she said, not looking up, and a town bracing for noise. Word is called to Rokes within a day. Abel tried to keep his voice even. Picked up a government payroll at Red Mesa. People say he's crossing south. People say he's crossing east. People always say. Tamsin set the curry comb aside, wiped a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her hand, and felt the leather thong at her wrist, a habit, not a talisman. If he comes through dry water, he'll want a drink, a bed, a blacksmith, and a stage schedule, or he'll want to make a point out of somebody. He's a man who collects points. Abel eyed the empty hitch rail across the way. I'd like him to pass by without learning a single name. Names have a way of walking out to meet men like Calder, she murmured, then clicked her tongue for the bay to shift. The horse obliged, and Tamsin slid a hand along the animal's belly, checking for heat and tenderness. She could find fever with her palm before a doctor could with a glass. The 2 riders from the dust plumes materialized by the hitching rail. The coiled one swung down hard, boots landing with a purpose that had very little to do with ground. The saddle-sore one took longer, jaw tight, dry as split timber. A boy, really. The kind of boy who went looking for a name and found someone else's. Horses need stalls, the coiled rider announced, as if the livery might argue. His smile was all teeth and no heat. And we need a farrier who won't ask questions. You need water first, Tamsin said. She didn't come to the rail until she'd rinsed her hands and wiped them dry. It was a habit she had cultivated. The time it took to clean your hands gave a man time to reveal his intentions. Buckets there. I'll see to the mare. She had addressed neither of them, and somehow both. The boy flinched when she reached for his mount's bridle, not because he feared for his horse, but because he feared being handled. Tamsin kept her movements slow. Easy, she told the animal, which was also for the boy. She moved in that small drift of air where horse sweat carried tiny truths, fear, hunger, miles, the memory of a brook 3 days old. The mare blew hot breath against her wrist and settled.
You're the liveryman? The coiled rider asked. I'm the livery, Tamsin said. It wasn't uncommon for travelers to stumble over the word man when they met her. She let it pass like wind through slats. Benjo, Sheriff Abel said, voiced like he'd put a lid on a kettle. You and your friend staying long? Benjo, the coiled one, let his smile widen, and Tamsin saw the mean in it. Long enough to cool the horses and warm our bones, Sheriff. He pressed the last word until it looked like a dare. Heard this town breeds politeness. Figured we'd come see if the stories were true. Just keep your politeness away from other people's pockets, Abel said. Tamsin led the boy's mare inside and nodded toward the shadowed aisle. Second stall, pull the saddle, don't drop it, she's sore under the cinch. The boy followed, stealing a glance at Tamsin, like he couldn't decide whether she was something to mock or something to measure himself against. His hands shook when he lifted the rig. The sweat stains told her the horse had borne his fear for days. She slid a pad under the mare's belly, where the hair had rubbed raw, and made a note, in the tally of her mind, of the boy's watch chain. Too new, too proud, too notched. She didn't tally notches like most. Hers were different. Who flinched at a slammed door? Who spoke with a broken tooth? Who laughed wrong? "Mercy, Tamsin!" came a voice from the alley. Maudie Fenn, Drywater's baker, stepped through with a tray covered by a patched cloth. "Brought cornbread. I burn half the pan and can't sell pride, so you get the shame." Maudie's eyes took in the riders. Maudie's eyes always took in everything. "You boys from north?" "From wherever there's a payday," Benjo said. "Then you've come to the wrong kitchen," Maudie said cheerfully, and set the tray on a bale. To Tamsin, she added, low, "Town's skittish. Calder's name buzzes like a fly. Flies don't knock, they find the open places." Abel lifted his hat, worried his hair with the heel of his palm, and said he'd be back. He'd do a loop past the bank, then the telegraph office, then the church, because those 3 doors told him how well the rest of the town was holding. Tamsin watched him go, and in her chest she rehearsed the old motions, the private ones she never let show. Which plank creaked loudest near the harness wall, how the loft shadow cut across the aisle mid-afternoon, where she could stand and watch without being seen. She had a radar no map drew. It wasn't magic. It was a skill born of need, and she sharpened it with chores until no one could tell the difference. The boy struggled with the bridle buckle and muttered a curse he didn't yet own. Tamsin took the reins, loosened the tongue with a twist of her wrist, and offered him the leather. "Your mare likes your voice when you sing. She'll lower her head for you if you remember you're somebody's son." He stared at her startled clean. I don't sing." "You did yesterday," she said, and not because she had heard it, she hadn't, but because the mare's mouth had the soft residue of humming. It was a thing she could taste there, salt and lullaby. The boy's face tightened then, and he nodded, and his hand steadied the tiniest bit. He led the mare into the stall and murmured something that was not a tune, but had the shape of one. Benjo pretended not to notice, which told Tamsin he had. By noon, the sun was hard enough to pin a shadow in place. Drywater's boardwalks brightened to bone, the blacksmith's forge breathed like a tired dragon, and the telegraph clicked quiet as a held breath. Calder-Rook's name rode each breeze like a rumor that had bought a better horse. Tamsin mucked stalls, stacked kindling, and kept her eyes on the world without dragging it into herself. The trick of staying was making the town feel like a place where leaving wasn't the only escape. She had become very good at making escape look like choice. She was hauling a bucket toward the cistern when the first laugh came, blunt as a thrown rock. It rolled down the street like a tin can tied to a wedding carriage and dragged attention with it. Tamsin didn't turn her head right away. She set the bucket down. She wiped her palms on her apron. She took a breath and let the air show her what was what. 5 men, 1 laugh, 3 chuckles, 1 silence. Good hats gone bad with sweat. Guns worn for punctuation, not grammar. Boots that knew how to run, spurs for show. And the quiet one, the silence, was the one whose dust told the real story. Darker, steadier, with a weight that wasn't weight, but history. Calder-Rook himself did not laugh. He rarely did. He saved his joy for the pull of a trigger and the sound a crowd makes when they decide not to fight.
They didn't ride hard into town. They rode like they'd been there all along. Abel didn't run to meet him. He walked, shoulders square, hands in plain sight, and Drywater held its breath because that was the bravest kind of walking a man could do. Maudie closed her bakery door halfway and left a sliver for watching. The church bell did not ring. Reverend Lott had learned you don't call a flock to a storm. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Calder said. He wore black like a man who liked the joke. His coat was fine cloth that had found itself in bad company. "We've been on the trail, and it's made us charitable. Thought we'd share our good humor with your town." He swung down from his horse with a grace that said he measured rooms by their corners. "I'm looking for a cold drink and a warm welcome, and a liveryman who knows his business." Abel stopped in the street, kept the distance polite and unhelpful. "We got a saloon where a man can wet his mouth," he said, "and a livery where a horse is better fed than most travelers. What we don't have is patience for charity from men who give with one hand and take with the other." Calder smiled a shape that never reached his eyes. "You say that like you've seen it done." "I police a crossing," Abel said. "I've seen everything done wrong twice." The gang dismounted, each with his own swagger, Benjo among them, suddenly deferential, as if the center of his orbit had arrived and all his jokes belonged to someone else now. The boy from the morning had vanished into the seam of buildings, the way boys do when they feel their names might be requisitioned. Calder walked to the trough first. Tamsin watched him dip his hand in the water, lift it to his mouth, spill most of it as if wasting was a sacrament. He turned his head and clocked the livery with a glance. The glance returned nothing of her. That was how she preferred it. She stood inside her shadow and did not shift. "You there," Calder called, as if waving down a wagon. "Liveryman." He used the word deliberately, looking for trouble he could call a misunderstanding later. "We've been on the trail, and it's made us charitable. Thought we'd share our good humor with your town." He swung down from his horse with a grace that said he measured rooms by their corners. "I'm looking for a cold drink and a warm welcome, and a liveryman who knows his business." "Stalls are clean," Tamsin said. "Love is extra." A few men laughed, too loudly, which meant they'd been waiting for permission, and Calder's eyes slid toward them, bored. He liked obedience dressed as camaraderie. He let the silence conjure her shape and then walked toward it. Up close he smelled like iron turned sweet and a little like the match you strike when you don't need light. He crossed the livery threshold and set his palm against the doorframe, staking the space with a casualness that meant he never had to ask whether he was welcome. "You run this?" His gaze took stock of the swept aisle, the brushed horses, the buckets aligned in a neat row like soldiers who'd stopped asking why. "You don't look like a man who does." "I don't look like a lot of things at first glance." "Do you look like someone who says yes?" he asked, and the men behind him enjoyed the shape of the question more than the content. Calder kept his voice easy for them. He wasn't ready to spend his anger. "Yes is a helpful word. Sheriff there says he's seen everything done wrong twice, but I'm a man who believes in efficiency. I like to get my wrong done right the first time." He smiled again, and this time the smile showed what it cost him to be charming. Tamsin lifted a halter. "You pay in coin, I say yes to stalls and water and feed. You pay in ruin, I say no." Benjo, riding the edge like always, took a step into the aisle and put a boot on the lower rail as if it were a neck. "Hear that, Calder? Our liveryman says no to ruin. I guess we'll have to behave." He turned his attention to Tamsin, hunting for her soft place. "What do they call you when they're grateful?" "Late, because gratitude shows up after the work is done." The blacksmith's hammer rang across the street. It was a small mercy, that sound. Honest work marking time. Calder tilted his head toward it and then back toward Tamsin, like he was measuring whose schedule the town kept. "Folks tell me Drywater sits in 3 shadows," he mused. Arizona claiming one, New Mexico another, Texas stretching greedy fingers north. Towns caught between borders are full of small laws and big habits. I collect habits." He gestured, a lazy wave that made a circle of his men. "Here is mine. We ride in, we find the worst listener, and we teach him to listen." Abel's voice came from the doorway, not loud, not brave, just present. "Ride on." Calder didn't turn. He spoke to Tamsin and let the sheriff harvest the echo. "Thing is, I can't ride on thirsty." He slipped a coin from his pocket, flipped it edgewise. It sang when it landed. "How much for the best stall? For my best horse? He likes to feel important." "Stalls don't feel," Tamsin said. "Animals do. And I don't sell importance. I rent care." She nudged the coin back with the toe of her boot. "Your horse eats for $1 a day. He drinks for free if you don't." There it was. The smallest yes disguised as a no. Calder saw it. He saw everything he wanted to own. He crouched, picked up the coin, dusted it with a thumb like he loved money with the same attention he gave violence. He stood slow, let the light take him. "You got a name, Liveryman?" She considered all the names she had carried, ones she had set down in towns that didn't need them, ones that had rusted on the road, ones you choose for yourself when you learn how little the world gives you one, and settled on the one that fit here. Tamsin. "Tamsin," he repeated, tasting it like liquor. "It'll do." He nodded to his men. "Stall 'em." They moved around her and past her, loud because the day needed their noise to scan itself. Horses snorted, leather creaked, and the livery absorbed it the way a tree absorbs wind, by staying. Tamsin kept her hands occupied, halter, lead, brush, fork. Nothing about her posture asked permission. Everything about it refused to be moved. The boy emerged from somewhere with a broom, trying to make himself used. Calder's gaze skipped over him and then returned, brief and sharp the way a hawk's shadow returns to a fence post. "You owe me a day," he said casually. The boy's mouth went white around the edges. He pushed the broom harder. "Paid you last night." "You paid me your pride," Calder said. "Don't pretend I'm the one who stole it." Tamsin shifted her attention without turning her head. "Broom's no good on dirt. Trade it for a rake. And mind your shoulders. No sense giving a man your back when he didn't ask for it." Calder watched the exchange with interest instead of irritation. "You got opinions, Tamsin." "I've got work. Opinions are for people with chairs." Abel had edged closer, just inside the shade now, where he could be seen if someone looked for the law and overlooked if someone didn't. He met Tamsin's eye for a fraction of a second, and she read the plea there. Later, not now. The town needed this moment to be ordinary. For an hour, Drywater performed normalcy with the zeal of a liar committed to the bit. Calder and two of his men crossed to the saloon. Benjo drifted between livery and trough like a vulture waiting for a body to gift him purpose. And the telegraph clicked a few words that added up to nothing. Maudie Fenn set out a second tray of cornbread because pretending is a muscle, and she had always been strong. Then a man ran. He ran the way men do when the story they are in has jumped a fence. He ran from the bank, hands empty, mouth open, eyes surprised by how small the horizon is when you need it wide. He ran past Abel, who moved faster, who stepped out and took hold of the man's sleeve and spun him like a dancer. "Weiler," Abel said, "what did you do?" Weiler stammered the truth. "Nothing." Calder's laugh, quiet this time, cut the word into something less than itself. He stepped from the saloon, wiping beer from his mouth with the back of his hand, and drew 2 lines in the dust with the toe of his boot, as if the street were paper and a pencil had finally found it. "How about we call this a congregation? Drywater, your sheriff says we ride on. I say we pause and let the day admire itself." His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. He lifted his chin at Benjo, who produced a pocket watch bright enough to make the sun jealous. "Is this what time looks like in a place like this?" Benjo called, holding the watch as though it had never been attached to anyone's vest. "Fancy." He cocked his whist, let the chain drape, and the boy from the morning flinched because the watch had once been his father's. Tamsin filed the flinch. She did not file the anger. Anger is hot and smokes the ledger. "Let's play something," Calder said. He walked to the center of the street where his two lines met and scuffed a circle there. A duel of manners. "Sheriff, I'll ask and you answer. If I find your answers wanting, I take a tithe for my trouble. If I find them pleasing, I take 2. "Manners don't tax," Abel said. "They do when I'm collecting," Calder replied, and he pointed, wide-open hand, to the bank, the telegraph, the church. "We'll start with the places that teach a town what it's about." His gaze settled on the livery. "Then we'll finish with the place that keeps its animals honest." Tamsin felt her pulse assume a rider's seat and sit deep. She stood at the door, neither inside nor out, and took inventory the way a soldier takes prayer. Hardware hooks, hay hooks, lead ropes, the pitchfork's balance in her palm, the knife in the grain barrel that no one had ever seen because why would they look for a blade in wheat, and the extra halter strap with the brass buckle heavy enough to break a man's thought if it met his temple. She was not arranging violence. She was arranging choices. Calder began his catechism. "Banker, how many honest loans this month?" "7, and one I regret." "To whom?" "To myself." The men laughed. Calder smiled, then tired of the joke he'd set in motion. "Telegraph, how many messages since dawn?" "5. "How many mattered?" "5. To the people who sent them." Calder liked that briefly. "Church, how many sinners on Sunday?"
Reverend Lot stepped into the light, face like a field after hail. "All," he said. "Honest," Calder nodded. "We'll tithe 2 from the bank and 3 from the church for that." "You'll tithe none," Abel said, and his hand hovered near his gun without loving it. "Take your pay and the road you don't have to bleed on." Benjo's grin sharpened. Sheriff's a poet. He turned toward the livery and smacked his palm against the hitch rail. "What about you, liveryman? How many horses are yours and how many are borrowed?" "All are in my care," Tamsin said. "Some belong to the road, some to the men who forget they do." "Pretty," Benjo said. "I think I'll take my tithe and rope. A good rope makes a lesson wear longer." He reached for the coil by the post. "Leave it," Tamsin said. Benjo froze, and Calder put a fingertip to the corner of his mouth and considered the woman as if she were a blueprint for a house he might break. "Seems we've circled back to yes and no." He took a step toward the livery. "You could smooth this out with one word." Tamsin looked at Abel and found the same plea in his eyes. Later, not now. Then she looked at the boy and found fear trying to wear courage and doing it poorly. Then she looked at Calder, because every choice must be looked in the face before it is chosen, and found a man whose calm was an instrument he tuned with other people's nerves. "Here's the problem," she said softly. "You think yes and no are coins you flip. I think they're roads you drive. We don't travel the same country." Calder's eyes brightened, not with joy, with interest, which is sometimes worse. "I was told there was a quiet liveryman in Drywater. I was misinformed. Or maybe," he added, tilting his head, "you're quiet in the way a loaded rifle is quiet. All that hush is just the air leaving before the report." Benjo's impatience leaked. "Let me take the rope, Calder. A knot tells a story better than a sermon." Calder spread his hands, mock benign. "Permission is a polite habit." Benjo grabbed the rope. The hitch rail creaked. The 2 nearest horses rolled eyes white with old memory. Tamsin moved at the speed of calm, forward, not fast, a step that lives in your bones so you never have to practice it out loud. She took the rope from Benjo's hand without touching him, by taking the coil at the precise moment he loosened it to brag. She looped it in half, shook it to obedience, and hung it back on its nail. Benjo stared like a man cheated at cards by the deck. "Didn't say you could. You asked the nail. It told you no." It should have been funny. Maybe it was. The day chose not to laugh. Calder's patience tipped like a glass set too near the table's edge. He flicked his fingers, small permission, and the man with the squint, Rook's left hand by the look of him, stepped in past Tamsin like he was going to teach a mule its letters. His shoulder brushed hers. That, more than anything, decided the shape of the hour. Tamsin did not step back. The left-hand man smelled like stale pepper and the kind of tobacco that punishes a mouth for using it. He reached for the halter strap by the door. She beat him to it by the margin that lives between heartbeats. Her palm found lever, his found air. His grin brought his lip up over a cracked tooth. "You hit me with that, I'll make your name short. I can cut letters too, but I don't waste sharp on dull." It wasn't bravado, and he felt it, the way a horse feels a storm. He went still, the animal stillness that means the next motion will be fast and the next regret quicker. Calder watched him. Abel watched Calder. The boy watched Abel. Maudie watched the boy, and Drywater watched Maudie, because some people teach a town how to look. "Let's collect our tithe and ride," Calder said finally. "This place irritates me by trying to be better than its latitude." He nodded to Benjo. "Take the watch, 2 coils of rope, and the idea that we were welcome. Those are the 3 most valuable things a town can lose." Abel stepped forward, past the point where talking keeps pace with outcome. "You'll take nothing." His hand settled on his gun, not for the draw, but for the truth of it. Weight, metal, the arithmetic of last chances. Drywater won't be measured by your math. Calder's eyes cooled. He gave the smallest tilt of his head, and the left-hand man's palm slid toward his pistol as if reaching for a thought. Tamsin had sworn not to introduce herself with the sound that ends a sentence, not unless a life insisted on it. The trouble with oaths are they're bred for quiet times.
The left-hand man went for his weapon. Abel inhaled, which is what a decent man does before he disappoints his children by dying. Benjo's chuckle sharpened into a noise that had no friends. Calder did not move. He did not need to. He was the gravity that assembled the rest. Tamsin did not draw. She stepped. Not sideways, not back, not forward. She stepped into the part of the world that the left-hand man forgot belonged to anyone but him. The triangle between his elbow and his hip, where a holster sits and lives like a secret. Her hand, empty, found his wrist with the accuracy of a locksmith's ear. She turned his reach into a gesture that introduced him to the ground. His gun left his hand because inertia is a democratic impulse. The halter strap whipped past his ear in the same motion. The brass buckle kissed the dust and came up speaking a new language. No one saw the second move. They saw its aftermath. A gun sliding under a wagon wheel. A man swallowing dust so fast it made him cough like he'd remembered his childhood wrong. Benjo's smirk stumbling on a step. Abel's hesitation melting like ice in coffee. Calder's eyes narrowing because boredom had just admitted a mistaken judgment, and he would have to punish it later. The town's breath came back like water over stones. "Tithes canceled," Tamsin said. She had not raised her voice, but somehow the day found a way to carry it from the telegraph to the blacksmith to the church. She held the holster strap low, not as a threat, as an answer. Stalzer's still a guller. Calder took 2 steps, and in those steps Tamsin lived a whole catalog. Angles, distances, the outline of the colt beneath his coat, the position of Abel's shoulder relative to Maudie's doorway, the length of rope between nail and panic. Calder's voice found her without finding heat. He said, "I was wondering whether the quiet here was ignorance or discipline." He looked at the man on the ground. He looked back at Tamsin. "I have my answer." He lifted his hand, a conductor about to raise a storm. Abel began to draw. Benjo's laugh, oh, that laugh, struck flint on steel. The boy dropped the rake and reached for the broom the way a drowning man reaches for a stick. Tamsin's eyes cut to the blacksmith's door. A shape moved there. Elias, the smith, shoulders like the anvil he loved. He lifted his hammer an inch and set it down again, a signal they'd agreed on years before without words. Not yet. Not unless. Calder's fingers curled. Tamsin! Maudie's voice, Maudie who never yelled, braided fear and command into something that could hold a person together. Behind! A flash in the side vision. The boy had lunged to do a brave, foolish thing, grab the gun under the wagon wheel, and Benjo, delighted by Providence, had already seen him. He moved like cruelty moves when it smells a smaller spine to climb. His boot came up, his heel aimed for the boy's hand. Tamsin didn't think. She had already thought. She let the halter strap drop. The brass buckle clanged against the nail like a bell, and she crossed the space between heartbeats where choices live and die. Her shoulder met Benjo's hip. His boot found wood, not bone. The boy rolled, breath shorn in two, and then returned to him in a gasp that tasted like metal. Calder, Benjo barked, humiliated by gravity. She has decided the shape of the hour, Calder finished. He drew. And Tamsin, who had promised herself a different life and had kept that promise longer than anyone thought possible, felt the day tear open like a grain sack under a bad stitch. Her hand, empty a moment ago, found steel in a place no one would have looked for it, because no one had ever had reason to search a liverywoman's apron hem for a hidden seam that carried a little weathered weight. The old iron kissed daylight. Abel's gun cleared leather 2 beats too slow. Calder's muzzle blackened the air between them. Drywater held its breath one last time. And in that suspended, knife-bright second, when the church steps remembered what knees felt like, when the telegraph's wire tightened without message, when Maudie's tray began to slide from her fingers, and the boy's mouth formed a prayer he didn't know the words to, Tamsin Bell chose the road that does not run beside mercy. She chose the road that runs through it. Her thumb found the hammer groove. The iron spoke. The first shot shattered. The first window down Main Street. Glass blew like startled birds. Dust gulped the light, then spat it back in shards. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Calder's barrel twitched to correct, a predator's micro-flinch. Tamsin saw it not with eyes, but with the horse sense she'd honed into something sharper than telling. She didn't shoot for his heart. She shot for the hand that told his heart what to do. The iron bucked once more, fast as breath. Calder's pistol leapt from his grip with a sound like a star being chipped. His fingers curled around air and pain. Abel's shot came late but true, splitting a spur off Benjo's boot and making his laugh bite his own tongue. Benjo howled, twisted, drew. Tamsin was already moving, pulling the boy behind the oats bin with her left hand while her right kept the pistol low and honest. The second man, the squint she'd dumped into dust, got his courage back in a rush and lunged. She saw his shoulder hitch a heartbeat before he committed and put a round into the hitch instead of the man. He spun, disbelief trying to carry weight. Down, she told the boy, and the command lived in the floorboards. He pressed there like a prayer. Calder did not grab for the fallen gun. He stepped away from its line the way a man steps away from a snake he respects. With his offhand, he palmed a derringer from someplace stitched beside his ribs. He was fast, fast like a habit. Her next round took the barrel clean, shaving it to a useless short mouth. He stared at the stump, then at her, and she saw her name penciled into his mathematics in a darker lead. Benjo lunged for the wagon's dropped revolver and kicked splinters instead. The weapon had skittered under the axle and jammed there like a stubborn root. He hurled a curse that tried to become a story about control and failed. "Stop," Abel said, voice steady now that action had burned away the couldn'ts. His badge hung crooked. His breath was right. No one leave this street with a weapon in hand. No one obeyed. Elias the smith stepped to the threshold of his shop, hammer down, tongs raised like a promise. Maudie Finn slid between 2 porch posts and got a hand on the boy's collar, not to drag, but to remind his skin it belonged to someone else.
Calder's eyes narrowed to a canyon cut. He lifted both empty hands to shoulder height as if introducing the sky. "You shoot pretty," he told Tamsin. "That's not a compliment. Pretty gets people killed because it makes them watch." "Watch then," she said. She didn't raise the pistol to center him. She held it low again, her angle, her way. The gun felt like a tool, not a fate. Heat ran from the wound in her shoulder, where a splinter had kissed when the glass went. She accepted the pain, catalogued it, and set it aside. And listen. Benjo swore and went for the boy anyway, because some men were raised to mistake proximity for power. Tamsin didn't shoot him. She stepped forward and snapped her heel against the wagon's wheel with a timing she'd learned from mules. Count 2, lift, shove. The wheel jumped an inch. The revolver coughed free into dust. She kicked it behind her without looking and heard Maudie's skirt whisper as it trapped the gun like a net and drew it in. Benjo's face went the color of old grease. The telegraph began to click, the operator's hand frantic, his message short. Elias's head flicked toward the wires, and Tamsin saw the worry underneath the law. If Calder's gang heard that wire singing to the next post, they would want to pluck it quiet. She put a round into the dry post above the head of Calder's man standing nearest the office. Splinters rained like hot rain. The man ducked and forgot ambition. "Enough," Calder said. He smiled like a blade laid flat. "I came to count, and I am counting. One sheriff with a badge that reads like a dare. One bakery with iron in its sugar. A liveryman who is not a man at all and carries death neat as a needle in her apron hem." He lifted both empty hands to shoulder height, as if introducing the sky. "And one rule you seem to believe in: nobody dies if they haven't chosen it." She could not tell whether he mocked or admired. She didn't bother to decide. "Choose better, then," she said. Silence stretched.
A horse screamed, one of Calder's, cinch chafed and temper thin. That sound made Tamsin's ribs remember every winter night she'd slept next to an animal to keep it living. It made her shoulder drop and her sight line ease a fraction, because compassion is a reflex you train the way you train a hand to stop shaking. Benjo saw the fraction and lunged to make a life out of it. He came in a crooked line, shoulder low, drawing from the offside like a cheat at cards. His muzzle flashed. Her muzzle answered. His hat flew, then his pistol, then his balance. He hit the trough with his chest and folded over it like laundry. He gasped in water and came up sputtering and spitting despair. "On your knees," Abel told him, and there was mercy in the command because it left room for breath. Calder took one step toward the trough, not to save Benjo, but to put himself between his men and humiliation. Tamsin read it. Pride was the hinge he used to swing a gang. Her next words were iron, shaped like invitation. "Calder Rook," she said, letting the name measure him. "You want out, without killing. Take it. Drop the steel still in hands, step away from the bank, ask Maudie for a dry crust. Have Elias pull that burr from your bay's hoof. You might ride with a story you can sleep under." He looked at her the way card sharps look at a deck they didn't cut. He almost laughed. "You think you can barter my blood with your town's decency?" "I barter with choices," she said. "Decency's just the only currency that doesn't counterfeit." Behind Calder, the squinting left hand found his feet and his spite at the same moment. He drew a knife from a boot and went for Abel, not with speed, with commitment. Commitment is faster. Tamsin fired and broke the blade at the hilt. The stub rang off the street like a cowbell thrown by a hurricane. The man stared at the naked handle, then at her, and finally at his own future, small as a button. "Holster," Abel said. "All of you, or put your weapons on the ground and step back." Calder didn't move. He watched the horse in the far stall instead, the bay with the scar like a question mark. The animal pawed, anxious. He looked back at Tamsin.
"You're the deadliest shot I've seen in 3 territories," he said, conversationally, and she felt the truth of it land without triumph. "Lawman, you know what that makes her." "A better future than we deserve," Abel said. "It makes her ammunition heavy, because restraint weighs what it spares." He drew a slow breath, almost reverent. "I'll remember how your hand moved. I'll remember that you shot like a promise." His eyes slid to the boy, and like a warning. He nodded once to his men. The gesture was not surrender. It was the calculus of a man who lives to collect a better angle later. 2 dropped their guns. 1 took a single step and then thought better. Benjo, chest heaving over the trough, let the water decide for him and lifted his palms. "Rifles down," Abel called, to the porches, where hidden fears wore barrels. "No one fires unless fired upon." No one fired. It ended without a bang, which meant it had not ended at all. Calder's eyes told her the math kept going where papers don't reach. He lifted his empty hands once more, like a priest of something unforgiving. "We'll stable as advertised. We'll drink once, light. We'll leave at dusk." He smiled, and this time there was no humor left to chisel. "And we'll send word about dry water. Some men will hear peace, some will hear a challenge. I can't stop a challenge from being heard. I can stop it from being answered wrong." "Can you?" he asked, and it was half curiosity, half curse. They stabled, they drank, they left, slow, unblooded, dragging the afternoon behind them like a dog that knows it should not return and knows it will. Abel posted 2 at the telegraph and 1 at the church, and walked the length of the boardwalk twice with his hat in his hand, thinking about how thin the difference is between a victory and a reprieve. Tamsin went back to work in the way of people who live where storm meets fence, by fixing the fence. She swept glass, checked fetlocks, wrapped the squint's forearm where the bullet had kissed and left bruise arguing with bone. He stared at her like gratitude was a language he'd heard and never spoken. "Why?" he managed.
"Because you'll lift a cup again," she said. "Maybe you'll lift it to your own mouth instead of someone's ruin." She tied the knot neat. "You can make me wrong, or not." He nodded, and something old in his shoulders, something that had been set like concrete, cracked by the width of a hair. By evening, Drywater's sky bruised purple, and the wind turned pages in the cottonwoods of its own accord. Abel came to the livery with his hat under his arm, the way a man brings unwelcome news into a quiet room. "Wire from Red Mesa," he said. "Marshall Company en route. They read Calder as a fuse. They want names. They want compliance, already neatly folded." He grimaced. "They ask about you." "Marshals ask about anyone who changes the ending of a day they weren't in," she said. The iron had cooled, cleaned, oiled, and returned to its seam. Her shoulder had stiffened in the way wounds do when the body thinks it's safe to complain. "What names?" "Yours, mine, Maudie's, Elias's, the boys if we've got it." He waited. "Ephra, that's the boy's name. But don't give it to anyone who would use it to shrink him." Abel worked at the brim of his hat, like a man sanding remembrance. "They want to know where you learned to shoot like that." "In places that don't have names anymore," she said, "and a few that still do and wish they didn't." She met his gaze so he could see she would not hide behind him and would not step forward without him. "Will you tell them?" "I'll tell them Drywater is my job."